of India and gave lectures on
ये
India's
अभी ये
incredible
वाला पैनल
cultural
वन स्टार्ट करो, पैनल
diversity.
टू में मैम अगर
His
बोलना शुरू कर दे
areas
तो
of
स्टार्ट करें.
interest and expertise include new literatures, world literature in English, literary theory and criticism, distant education, South Asian politics, Australian studies translation theory, and research. He is the coordinator of postgraduate diploma program in book publishing. Sir has also authored 6 books centering on literature, criticism, and translation. He is supervising PhD research in the university, and his research students are building upon newer ways. Just give me a minute. Sorry, I just lost. Just give me a second.
I think
Right.
whatever you have said is enough. There is no
No,
need
no,
to
no,
further
no, 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 sir.
elaborate on that.
No, no.
There are
No,
such
just give me a
important
minute, sir.
speakers there, so
Okay.
you
So,
use time for the academic.
sir, I was adding presenters into the meeting. Just give me a minute. Yes. So to continue, his research articles in the national and international journals have a widespread following. He has organized number of important national and international seminars to promote the discipline and interests of larger humanity. He has represented the country at various international forums and promoted the cause of equality, peace, and global citizenship. He has been an international fellow of Australia India Council and has represented the country in Australia, UK, USA, Korea, Cambodia, Nepal, Malaysia, and Thailand. Professor Pramod has been a member of many school boards in university and across the nation and has initiated several important campaigns such as Youth for Service. He has been appointed research board member in many universities in and outside India and holds membership of various learned bodies. He has been awarded as the Ambassador for Peace by the Universal Peace Federation and nominated as the President of Youth Federation of World Peace India Chapter. I welcome you on board, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so very glad to be able to connect to you, and this is a very important academic intervention. I look forward to listen to all of you. So, do you want me to carry it forward now?
Right, so you can go on with the presenters now, sir.
Yeah, I think yes. May I begin with a sense of expression of my sincere thankfulness and gratitude to the organizers. And I understand that this session centering on caste and marginality in the broader debate that we are having in the form of National Conference on Resistance and Revolutions, the politics of marginality. I think it's a timely intervention in the sense that in the this COVID-19 and post-corona world that we are facing, we need to probe into the important questions of this social well-being and the questions which have been caused and how the fault lines have been exposed even further. I was listening to the sessions, the speakers in the last session also, how for example, different aspects. Professor Rajkumar talked about caste issue, and other speakers. I mean, what Professor Anil Aneja said about in the sense, how disabilities and what he said that like the issues that we face. I mean, and the new normal. I mean, it has been a problem for the differently able people for a long time, and we need a lens, we need a theoretical understanding, and then maybe if beyond that also to be able to understand this. And I think that our present session is very important, and we have very important speakers. And when we are looking at it over the last decades, I find that the concept of resistance has gained considerable attraction as a tool for critically exploring the subaltern practices in relation to power, even goes so far as to argue the hegemonic attitude in social sciences of today is that of resistance. I hope you'll agree with me that relatively few scholars have so far elaborated on the interlinkages of the shifting forms of resistance in general, and how acts of everyday resistance entangle with more organized and sometimes mass-based resistance activities in particular. When we are holding discussion in this session, I think it's very important. When I was able to read through the topics titles, and I know the presenters, like their profile and the serious contribution that they are making, both academically and socially. So it is not going to be only intervention on the academic front. So I'm looking forward to that. And in order to better understand the resistance as practice, such entanglements need to be carefully analyzed by taking into consideration the connections between power and other various practices of resistance. And for a more coherent understanding, modalities of power and resistance should in addition be theorized in relation to concept of agency. I'll understand when we I think we will first, I'll try to summarize in whatever powerful presentation intervention that our speakers will make. I would like to welcome Dr. Prabhakar Palaka to make his presentation when an epistemological marginality of the Dalit word, and he'll present a case based on readings of select Dalit autobiographies. Dr. Prabhakar, we are welcoming you. You are a man of great knowledge, scholarship. Please go ahead and enlighten us with what you are trying to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Pramod, and good to have you as the chair, dear chair, and the co-panelists, and friends and colleagues and students. So I have changed the title of my topic a bit, especially the second part. It is, epistemological marginality of the Dalit world, reading of Basudev Sunani's novel, Masani Sahara Delhi. This is a very recent novel. So, which, translated, it means Delhi, the city of domes. I basically chose this novel because I saw in the, in this particular session, there are too many of autobiographies, discussions on autobiographies. Let me begin. So, yeah, Michel Foucault rightly said that knowledge is or has power. People who have knowledge have power too, and people who are in power create knowledge. Thus, only certain ideas have dominated the epistemological discourse, and certain ideas have become the normative, while certain other kinds of ideas have been deliberately relegated to the margin. History is a witness to the fact that ideas are created and sustained through their hegemonic dominance, either through consent or through coercion, in the words of Gramsci. And in order to do so, people in power have manipulated the state apparatus in Althusser's idea and used them as mercenary. In Indian context, Brahmanism was created and shrewdly sustained for ages as the normative. Exclusion and the idea of purity and pollution was not only created, but also when disseminated to the people in the margins, they readily internalized the concept as the normative and lived by those norms. So Brajaranjan Mani, in his book, De-Brahmanization of History, rightly argues Brahmanism uses the ideology of caste as a crucial instrument to dehumanize, divide, and dominate the productive majority. However, such hegemonic and regressive ideas never went unchallenged in India, though it might not have been in an organized way, just as Foucault says, domination and resistance go hand in hand. So Dalit Panthers movement in 1970s gave a decisive turn to the Dalit movement in India by creating a counter discourse against Brahminism in a very systematic manner. Dalit literature which emerged from Dalit movement, it is not just about expression of anger against the discursive idea of caste and casteism or pain and misery of the community, but also it strongly lies in creating Dalit philosophy and Dalit epistemology. In their writing, they attempt to establish that they are not a people without culture, without knowledge, without philosophy. So Dalit epistemology lies in Dalit experience. In this context, Gopal Guru, a political thinker and critic, in his book Cracked Mirror, he says, experience plays an important epistemological role in the production of thought. Experience is prior to thinking and knowing. Ambedkar follows this methodology while developing his thought. Experience becomes important for Ambedkar because the existing society, according to him, is mostly driven by the text like Manusmriti, which has formidable cognitive influence on conservative social consciousness. Thus, the skills of cleaning, sweeping, washing clothes, tanning, constructing manual labor of the Dalits and the marginalized and their experiences were never considered as source of knowledge. However, thinkers like Kanchailaya Shepherd call these communities as productive caste and their skills and experiences as the source of knowledge. Kanchailaya Shepherd says Hinduism considered production as pollution and the productive people as polluted human beings. The productive human self suffered from lack of self-respect, dignity, as well as initiative. So this paper will not only question the epistemological world of Brahmanism, it will also attempt to showcase the strong presence of Dalit epistemology and Dalit philosophy through reading Basudev Sunani's new novel, Masani Sahara Delhi, Delhi, the City of Tombs. So Masani Sahara Delhi is a pan-Indian novel, though written in Odia language. It is based on the lives of migrants from across the country, Bihar, Orissa, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Uttar Pradesh, even Nepal, living in Delhi from generation to generation. It talks about their joys and sorrows. The common imagination of Delhi is that it is the capital city of India, city of historical monuments, parliament, city where prime minister, president, ministers, and other political leaders, and hub of political happenings, academic institutions, and coaching centers, and so on. But in the novel, Anurag, the alter ego of the author, sees Delhi through the lens of the migrant laborers like cobblers, sweepers, plumbers, rickshaw pullers, vegetable vendors, housemaids, construction workers, etc., who constitute around 50 to 60 lakhs of people. So the narrator sees these people as those who have built the city. They are the lifeline of the city. Without these people, the city of Delhi is but a city of the dead or city of the tombs. About one such character, Anurag, the alter ego of Basudev Sunani, he says, people like Rajinder, who keeps others' houses and environment clean and provide opportunity to others to live a healthy life, they never come to the limelight. They lie buried and unseen under the filth of the rich and educated people of the city. During the first wave of corona pandemic, when lockdown was announced, when the migrant laborers had started leaving the city dwellers for the first time understood the value of their services. The political leaders pleaded with them not to leave the city, not because they sympathized with them, but because they thought if all these laborers went away, who would take care of the city? So Vasudev Sunani captures their worry in the novel. Their worries were who will water the garden, who will wash the dishes or mop the floors, who will sweep the roads, who will supply vegetables at our doorstep, who will wash our vehicles, who will clean the plates in the hotels, who will carry cement, bricks, and sand, and who will clean toilets and gutters, who will remove the dead dogs from the roads. In fact, they are the lifeline of the city, Delhi. The novel highlights and traces back Delhi's 3,000 years of history. While doing so, the novelist attempts to unearth some of the untold stories behind the history of Delhi and behind each historical monument and the names of certain places in Delhi. How does he do it? For him, the migrant laborers who have stayed here in Delhi from generation to generation, they become the living archives for Anurag. Anurag asks a question to himself, how come there are so many things which we don't know about Delhi? In which archives of India can we get evidence of these events? So Vasudev Sunani, as an activist writer, sees this productive caste and their experiences and narrations as authentic source of history writing or history rewriting. Hardly one would find the story of the contractor who brought laborers from Odisha to engage them in the construction of India Gate. The narrator unravels their story, their joys and sorrows, and their survival in the city after they stayed back in Delhi. The ending lines of the novel is powerful. It says, Qutub Minar, Lal Killa, India Gate, Rashtrapati Bhavan, Connaught Place, Central Secretariat, all other small or big places have been built by these people. If you break open the walls, you will get the stench of their sweats. Yes, stench of their sweats and blood drops, but they couldn't be recognized. This is the problem of education and pride of our voluptuousness. The novel also celebrates the culture of the marginalized. Vasudev Sunani's another book titled History of Dalit Culture strongly establishes and celebrates the culture of the Dalits and other marginalized. The same voice reverberates in the novel Masani Soharo Dilli. Rajinder is a garbage collector in the novel. When Anurag sees him segregating garbage according to their kinds, Anurag could not understand the need of it. For him, dirt is dirt. Why that should be segregated again? But Rajinder beautifully and scientifically explains why he was segregating them. Such beautiful culture of cleaning has been denigrated and demonized. In the words of Kanchailaya Shepherd, it is a productive culture and people like Rajinder are truly environmentalists. If these workers stop for a day or two, the whole city would be stinking like hell. While arguing about not acknowledging the skills of the subaltern, Kanchailaya says Brahmanic Hinduism debased the skill system of these castes by not granting them any spiritual status and also by not allowing their knowledge to take shape, expand, synthesize, and hybridize itself. Another point I would like to highlight here is Duma culture of the Dalits reveals the philosophy of the community. Duma means spirit. From the root word Duma, the word Dom has been derived, which refers to a Dalit community. The same community is called differently at different parts of the country. Very interestingly, from the practices of burial to the dead and other rituals related to the dead performed by Ram Dulal, a character, main character in the novel, shows the community's belief in the Duma worship. Duma worship denies the existence of heaven and hell. After the death, the spirit of the ancestors is invited to the Pidar, a place of worship where the spirits are worshipped. But the mainstream religion has imposed its hegemony over the marginalized culture and over the marginalized culture and religion. Anurag was surprised to see the photo of Radha Krishna hung on the wall of Ramdulal, a cobbler, his shop. On the day of Holi, when Radha and Krishna were worshipped by the crowd, Ramdulal's father and the bullocks were killed by the same frenzied crowd, heavily drunk with bhang. The name Ramdulal suggests the most beloved of Ram, but ironically, in the novel, he is hated by everyone. The narrator engages Ramdulal in a religious discourse and educates him with the philosophy of Ravidas, a religious leader of his own community. It was not to change his religion, but to bring Dalit consciousness in Ramdullah. Finally, he hangs the portrait of Ravidas in the middle of all other photos. Thus, like other Dalit writers, Basudev Sunane, through his writing, is keenly involved in reclaiming the history, culture, philosophy, and epistemology of the Dalit world. Thank you.
All right. Dr. Prabhakar, thank you very much for your presentation centering on the epistemology, culture, literature, and I think what stands out so very prominently, the way you have narrativized this text, Vasudev Sunani's text. It's good that you have changed the title and you have focused more on Anurag's experience. And when I think it was truly interdisciplinary in the sense that you talk about psychology, you talk about history, anthropology, and that sense of inter and transdisciplinarity that makes. I think with your presentation, we will be able to understand this the whole idea of politics of marginality, politics of resistance. So I think I have to request all our presenters also that like we will present about 20 minutes each if that is agreeable to all of you, so that we can have more time for discussions and Q&A. I'll request our next presenter, and our next presenter is yes, we have. Yeah, Ranjana Nagar. She's
Yes,
presenting
sir. Yes, sir. I'm here.
presenting on articulating Dalit consciousness through Om Prakash Valmiki's autobiography. Ranjana, you are welcome, and you make your presentation, please.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you to the chair and the organizing committee for giving me this opportunity to make a small presentation about Dalit consciousness. I have worked on 3 autobiographies, but in particular here for this conference, I have chosen to talk about Om Prakash Valmiki's autobiography, Juthan. Now, why I have chosen this particular autobiography is because the process, because Om Prakash Valmiki has himself talked a lot about Dalit Chetna, Dalit consciousness, and he has tried to define it. I would not say define per se, but he has tried to articulate an understanding of Dalit consciousness for readers, Dalit and non-Dalit readers. My presentation focus on the attribute that the process of writing Dalit literature is an outcome of awakening of Dalit consciousness, and through the literature, through this Dalit literature, you try and awaken the consciousness among the readers as well. So beginning with the central idea, I would like to introduce the book a bit. Juthan, Dalit's life and autobiography is written by Om Prakash Valmiki. He was born on 30th June 1956 at Barla, Muzaffarnagar, Uttar Pradesh. It's a small town in UP, so Hindi belt. Valmiki documents Dalit lives in Juthan as a narrative of inequality, oppression, discrimination, and marginalization. It is an autobiographical text that narrates Valmiki's birth and childhood in an untouchable environment, as well as in his rise to a prominent figure or a Dalit writer and revolutionary who fights for the freedom of marginalized people. In this autobiography, Valmiki, who is born in Chura community, traces and documents episodes and people in his life that led to the awakening of Dalit consciousness in him. And through his journey, he tries to inspire and educate others like him. Here, I'm not use the word Dalit, but I would try to say marginalized people, as the term Dalit itself include a spectrum of people. So marginalized people like him to develop this consciousness about themselves, the of identity and acknowledging their rights. As a text, for my reading, I have divided the text into two parts. First is the part where he's in village, and he completes his school education, and the second part where he's in the city in the city and he furthers his education. As I've divided the book, the journey of his the journey. Okay, moving on. In Juthan, as Valmiki narrates his journey of achieving education. So I begin with with the phase where he is enrolled into the schools. So as he begins, he narrates his journey of achieving education, and it was not an easy journey. It was a journey full of pain, agony, humiliation, and he in the process he exposes the hypocrisy of the Indian education system, where both the teachers and his headmaster of the school used to humiliate Dalit children. They not only humiliated or discriminated children socially, but they also used to physically hurt them, emotionally hurt them, suppress them physically as well as emotionally. And I'm going to quote one of the incident, or I'm going to enumerate one of the incidents that are given in the text. It is an incident where Dalit students are beaten badly and abused in an everyday school environment. He talks about his an episode in fourth class where his friend Sukhan Singh has had a boil on his belly, and he used to keep his shirt folded up in class so as to keep the boil uncovered, so that even his shirt can be taken protected from the spots, or it could be kept clean, as well as the boil might not get you know uh, infected, or should not feel more pain because of it. But one day his teacher, he hit the boil of this of Sukhan and with a stick. He hit the boil of Sukhan with a stick, and Sukhan started screaming with pain. And seeing at this pain, Valmiki, who is a friend to Sukhan, start crying, whereas other students are unaffected by it. This episode, the all that Valmiki could do was to feel the pain of his fellow friend and could cry. We do not see him, standing up for it, or even raising his voice against why and what was the reason. He doesn't even explain what was the reason. The teacher just comes and hits the child. Living in such a society, Valmiki himself grew up as a very timid and innocent boy, and he never had the courage to question or to protest against such caste tyranny which was inflicted on him and like him, other people like him who were discriminated on everyday basis in the school and in his village. Valmiki here can be seen as a victim of untouchable consciousness, as he is unable to question or protest against the caste discrimination and silently suffers the tyranny of the upper caste. But we can see the seed of protest sown in him during the same time, during his school days. One such episode, he narrates that since sweeping and cleaning are the traditionally assigned occupation for churas in the UP belt, it was considered to be their social and moral responsibility. And when Valmiki was admitted in the school, being a chura, he was given the task of sweeping the school compound by the school headmaster. So rather than sitting in the class and studying, he was made to clean the school compound every day. Now I'll just narrate how the story goes, how this particular incident has been enumerated in the text. So he talks about that how the headmaster, when he was admitted in the school, he was asked by the headmaster to clean the playground, and he narrates the playground was very large than my physique, my small physique. I could barely handle the cleaning, and it hurted my back. My face was covered with dust. Dust had gone inside my mouth. The other children in my class were studying and I was sweeping. Headmaster was sitting in his room and watching me. I was not allowed to get a drink of water. I swept the whole day. The second day, as soon as I reached school, the headmaster again put me to sweeping the school. I swept the whole day. I was consoling myself that I will go back to the class from tomorrow. He's just narrating the process day by day. He's cleaning. On the third day, actually, he escapes and he just hides inside the class. And the moment the teacher gets to know, the headmaster gets to know that the school compound has not been cleaned, has not been swept, he goes on looking for Valmiki, and in a booming voice, he called out for Valmiki, and he calls him with abusive language, the most foul language that one can think of, and he asks him to come out and clean. Now, this entire episode, not just the headmaster, but other upper caste untouchable students were also part of it, because they highlighted where Valmiki was hiding and he was trying to attend the class. The only fault here that he made was he didn't want it to sweep and he just wanted to attend the class. The booming voice of headmaster terrified Valmiki greatly. His tears streamed down his face, and he picked the broom and he started, it was nothing but this collection of small thin sticks, because since he was sweeping for 2 days, there was nothing left, and he started sweeping again. In this episode, the first instance where he learned to stand up or to be courageous arises, and it is his father. Because on the third day, while he was cleaning and he was crying, his father happened to pass by the school. And as he was sweeping the playground, he spotted him crying. Valmiki recounts the entire story while sobbing to his father, and his father grew so enraged that he grabbed the broom from his grip, tossed it away, and he referred to the headmaster as Dronacharya, equating caste relations in the 20th century with those that existed 2000 years before. And he began to scream, "Who is that teacher, that progeny of Dronacharya, who forces my son to sweep?" At this point, all the teachers in the school have stepped out, hearing the Valmiki's father voice, including the headmaster. And they started calling his father by nasty and offensive names, and they shouted back that, "Take him away from here, the Chura wants to be educated, go on, otherwise I will break your bones." So such things have been said. And while his father is taking Valmiki away, he says that, "You are a teacher, so I am leaving now. But remember this much, master, this Chura cow will study right here in this school. And not just him, but there will be more coming after him." So this is the first instance of courage, of protest, of confrontation in front of Valmiki, which I won't say give him, which is the reason for awakening of Dalit consciousness, but it had really sown the seed of protest in him, has given him the courage to question his teachers, to question such kinds of actions which he could not understand the rationality behind. And you will find that Valmiki father not only confronted the headmaster, courageously, but he also confronted the panchayat, and he asked for his admission to the school, and his admission to the classroom, and his right to be educated. So all these things have a major impact on Valmiki, wherein he is trying to, while in the act of writing, he wants the readers to understand that these are such small incidents which he doesn't know how and why his father acts a certain way, but he understands that there is something which gives him the right to question and gives him the courage not to take discrimination and suppression as it is, silently suffering. He should not be silently suffering. The second incident that uh, when we have another problem with his father, the image of the courage, and why I would not say this is the awakening of Dalit consciousness, is because his father reliance for um, upgradation, or maybe, for the mechanism for fighting against such tyranny and such tyranny of caste system is is begging to the upper caste, or asking them to help the low caste or the untouchables. So his father, actually, after this incident, he goes to the panchayat, and he goes to home, and he asks the upper caste people, the Tyagi people, to let his son study. So rather than giving the agency to the Dalit or to Valmiki, or taking it on himself, he rather look at the upper caste for providing them some kind of redemption, some kind of support. So this is where we see the Gandhi's ideology coming in, but not Ambedkar's. And this is where we do not say this is Dalit consciousness, but I would say this is something which we can call scheduled caste or scheduled caste consciousness. I will later explain it further. The second incident, which helped Valmiki again rise up to the occasion of challenging or questioning the authority of upper caste people, is an incident of wedding at his village. So there was a wedding at Tyagi house in his village, and his mother went, as per the custom. They used to collect the leftovers, pattals, leaf plates. They used to collect it. So his mother went to the wedding, and she actually, after collecting, they were waiting patiently for the baratis to complete, so the wedding guests to complete their meal, and they were collecting the pattals. But the mother here asked for some, not just leftovers, but something more to be given for her children, to which the Tyagi refused, and he actually abused his mother. And his mother, at this occasion, upturned the entire basket of juthan on the door of the Tyagi, and she humiliated the Sukhdev Singh Tyagi by saying that, I do not need it. If you want it, you keep it for your own self and your own family. And she left it. So that night, Valmiki saw that her mother turning into, he calls goddess Durga. He saw his mother turning into goddess Durga. And it was the first time he saw his mother being so angry. She emptied the basket right there in front of Sukhdev Singh's door, and she said, "Pick it up and put it inside your house. Feed it to the Baratis tomorrow morning." She gathered him and his sisters and left like an arrow. Sukhdev Singh had pounced on her to hit her, but his mother had confronted him like a lioness and without being afraid. So these two people in his life, and these two instances particularly gave him the courage to question. And thereafter, in the autobiography, we will see um, Valmiki questioning his teacher regarding Dronacharya. So there was this small episode in the school where the teacher was very emotional, and he was teaching them that Dronacharya was living in a terrible condition. He was very poor, so he was very poverty strict, and he said that Dronacharya didn't had even the flour. Food, so milk, so he mixed flour into water and gave it to his hungry son Ashwathama in place of milk. And this Mahabharat narrative had elicited strong emotions in the entire class. Everyone in the class felt sad for Dronacharya, and after hearing about his severe poverty, Valmiki, on the other hand, questioned the teacher, and he had the audacity to get up and ask. And I quote him, "So, Ashwathama was given flour mixed in water and instead of milk. But what about us who had to drink mar?" Mar is basically the water in which you boil rice. So chura basically in the houses when they used to have parties or celebration, they used to boil rice, and the water that was left was called mar. And the chura community people used to go and collect this mar and drink it by putting some salt and some kind of spices in it. They used to enjoy it. So he says, people like us who had to drink mar, how come we were never mentioned in any epic? Why didn't an epic poet ever write a word on our lives? The entire class stared at him, as if he made an outrageous and absurd remark. And the teacher, on the other hand, yelled at him as though he had made a worthless point. And the teacher says, darkest Kalyug has descended upon us, so that an untouchable is daring to talk back. This episode is an excellent example of Dalits' protest against unequal distribution of commodities and services justified on the basis of caste. This incident brought into light how submissive consciousness and untouchable consciousness is gradually transformed into assertive consciousness. Yet, we never see Valmiki trying to break or challenge the inhuman caste hierarchy. The final awakening of Dalit consciousness in Valmiki happens in the second part of the book. It was only at DAV college that a classmate, Hemlal, a Jata, an untouchable caste again, introduced him to Dr. Ambedkar's biography and encouraged him to study it. One day, while Valmiki was sitting in the library looking at some books, Hemlal put a small book in his hand. As Valmiki was flipping through its pages, Hemlal said, "You must read this book." The name of the book was Dr. Ambedkar, a biography. Its author was Chandrika Prasad, Jigyasu. Valmiki was grateful to Hemlal. He had truly shown him a new path. His reading of the book had awakened his consciousness, and here I would say the Dalit consciousness, awakening of Dalit consciousness begins from here, because this book has given him given voice to his muteness. Valmiki, who was a voracious reader,
Maybe
had
Ranjana, if you can conclude, please, the broad
sure,
point.
I'll do that, sir. So, in this particular episode, here a new word, Dalit, was entered into his vocabulary, and he understands how that word can never be a substitute for Harijan, because so far he has been reading about Gandhi, and he always said that Harijan is the right word to represent them. So all these this understanding of the word Dalit and the understanding or enlightenment about the self, his identity, his rights, his right to equality and justice, gave him not only the voice but the courage to become a writer. Because later on we see that after this incident, when he's posted to to the first factory, and he start writing blog, because he's posted in Bombay. So he writes his first blog about caste violence, and he is not at all scared of losing the job. Though there are incidences where we see that he's scared of he's been challenged, he's been challenged, he's been threatened about his job. But here, when he's writing about that particular incident of caste violence in the paper, he's not scared. And later on, we see him developing into a great writer who not only talks about Dalit emancipation, but he also struggles, fight for it. Thank you. I will conclude with that. Thank you, sir.
All right. Very important presentation. You have talked about Prakash Valmiki's Jhutan, which is a central text. I mean, it came in late 90s, and it made much of impact. You have the points that you have raised, the incidents that you have shared. I think if we look at I mean, this is now prescribed in master's level courses there in Columbia University, and the translator, if you look at her forward, like in the translated work, Arun Prabha Mukherjee, if I may just share a couple of sentences in which she says that Om Prakash Valmiki's Jhutan is among the few books that have a profound impact on my consciousness. It brought to the surface as a scalpel penetrating deep into the flesh the details of my childhood and adolescence in a small town in North India, where casteism and untouchability were normal, where untouchables cleaned our latrines and carried the excrement away from on their heads. When they asked for waters, I mean, this is fairly longer, and it says that my textbooks did inform me about the evil of untouchability and what Mahatma Gandhi had done to eliminate it, but they did so in a detached, abstracted manner, couched in a language that seemed to have no connection with my lived reality. So I understand that your presentation today, Ranjana, will make more impact. And but the episode of mother's reaction in the marriage, you see, I think the people, those who talk about Dalit patriarchy. I think you can read that episode once again, and that reaction of autonomous character and autonomous like human response. I think there is so much more to read. Thank you very much for raising all those points here. We'll move forward, and I'm basically stopping all of you so that we can have more discussion towards the end of it. Huh? So I'll request the next presenter, Raj Gaurav Verma, who teaches there in Department of English and MEL, University of Lucknow. He's presenting on Living a Thousand Tragedies, Violence, Memory and Trauma. Raj Gaurav Verma, you're welcome. Please go ahead. Next 20 minutes, please.
Thank you, sir. My warm wishes to the Department of English, Dayal Singh Evening College, University of Delhi, and greetings to you, sir. Pramod Kumar Mehra, chair for the session, and my dear co-presenters. So, I would like to begin with a quote from Shakespeare that when beggars die, there are no comets seen. The heavens themselves blaze for the death of the princes. So that is where we find that how the margins are created and how the center is created, and then the others, they are left to the margin. So when we look at a Dalit's life, what is a Dalit's life? A Dalit's life is a mockery on gods. It is a blasphemy against the moral, social, and religious order. It is a scorn on humanity. It is a mutilation of justice and dignity. It is a poisoned bread, as Arjun Dangle framed it, a Juten leftover, as Om Prakash Valmiki calls it. It is a scar, as K. Gunashekaran calls it. It is a prison, as B. Kamble calls it. A straggler's life, as Dada Sahib More calls it. So a Dalit life is an autobiography of pain, a biography of pity, a history of violence and suffering, a memory of alienation, an experience of humiliation and submission. Despite the journey so far since independence, a Dalit fails to be identified with Dal, which means soil or ground. And still the identification of the Dalits is with Mal, shit. And that is where we find that the Dalit oral folktales, they are filled with all kinds of episodes which are like a violation of the sacrosanct by referring to shit and the cardinal representations. So I would like to enter into the debate of Dalit writing for themselves and the caste writing for them. So when a caste author writes for a Dalit, it may aesthetically appeal even better than the Dalit writers. The advantage that the readers have when they are reading a work on Dalit by a caste writer is that they can develop a sympathetic or an empathetic attitude towards the characters. And so a slap on Bakha's face and the abuses that Chandu faces in the Barbers Trade Union and wounds and death of Velutha and the god of small things, they all generate a kind of narrative empathy. And as far as narrative empathy is concerned, I would like to quote Harrison, who says that narrative empathy will have its own kind of drawback. Why? Because narrative empathy might actually serve as an escape from the real life ethical demands, allowing readers to congratulate themselves for feeling with fictional characters while simultaneously doing nothing for the people in need. So the question that comes to mind is that can a sympathetic or empathetic expression be replaced by the lived and the real experience? The pain that an outcast has to undergo is a unique, individual, and personal. It can be narrated, but it cannot be conveyed. As the idiom goes, to put oneself in someone's shoes. Nevertheless, we need both kind of narratives, the lived experience as well as the empathetic ones. So we see that both will have the same role to play in literature. That is the expression of the experience, but they will have a distinct kind of role as far as aesthetics is concerned. So in the Annihilation of Caste, Ambedkar, he writes, trying to hint the way the caste and the outcast people, they have looked at the idea of social reform. And when he was like, he has prepared the presidential address for the for this the Jatpat Todak Mandal, and did not allow him to deliver it. And obviously it became clear to his mind that how different the two kinds of mindsets were. And so he says that their attitude towards social reform is so different from mine that I have found it difficult to pull on with them. So it is in this context that we find that Ambedkar, when he has looked at the caste and when he has looked at India, we do find that India has modernized, and that is what I argue, that even caste has modernized. So the list, they lacked a place in the country before, and so they lack that identity even now. And Arundhati Roy, she has written an introduction to the Annihilation of Caste, the Doctor and the Saint. And in this introduction, she says that when we talk about the peace in Indian society, obviously this peace is maintained by upholding the caste system. Dalit aspirations are a breach of peace. So when Dalits, they start claiming for their rights, they start speaking, they start expressing their aspirations, obviously it means that there is some sort of violation of peace. So in light of this argument, this paper attempts to look at some of the works by the Dalit writers, and there are like certain premises upon which the society is based. So obviously there are two kinds of forces, constructive and destructive, two mindsets, conservative and liberal. And obviously there is a relationship which exists between the individual and the society and the state. And the fourth premise is that we understand that it is very difficult to intrude and trespass the knowledge system, the belief system. So, and therefore, there obviously, when we have talked about margins, and the entire seminar, the entire conference is built upon the idea of margin, and that how the nations, the communities, they are divided on the ideas of gender, class, race, religion, language, geography, culture, territory, region. And obviously, we understand that we have internalized these differences. So I'm just quoting Vinod Kumar Rawat. He, in his book Knowledge, Power, Resistance, Beyond Bacon, Ambedkar and Foucault, he refers to Marilyn Monroe, that ritual, myths, legends, proverbs, folktales, they are part of the belief system. And these beliefs can be seen as a form of knowledge. So Marilyn Monroe describes belief as a process of knowing that is not subject to verification or measurement by experimental means within the framework of a modern Western scientific paradigm. Rather than viewing belief as the opposite of knowledge, we can examine the process of believing as a way of knowing. The term belief is, in our society, an exotic term like superstition, which calls into question its own validity. We usually describe our own beliefs as knowledge. So whatever we believe, we consider that this is the knowledge. And that is where we find that where the differences, they get rooted in our psychology and in our collective consciousness, as a result of which the other is created out of our own self. And this is what Thomas Paine, he has written in, who's the writer of In the Common Sense, his essay. He said that a long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right, and resists at first a formidable outcry in defense of custom. But the tumult soon subsides, time makes more converts than reason. So just because something is happening before our eyes, we just believe that it is natural, whether we do not even question that how natural or how usual it is. So in one of the famous book is Caste of Mind, Colonialism and Making of Modern India. This is by Nicholas B. Doug, and he says that caste has been seen as omnipresent in Indian history and as one of the major reasons why India has no history, or at least no sense of history. Caste defines the core of Indian tradition, and it is seen today as the major threat to Indian modernity. If we are to understand India properly, and by implication, if we are to understand India's other core symbol, Hinduism, we must understand caste, whether we admire it or revile it. So caste system was based on the logic of continuous hierarchy, as Gopal Guru says. And then there is Diana P. Myers, who writes that caste has often served as such a prison for India. That is, for many people, India is caste and caste is India. There was also an article by Balchandran, and he was asked to deliver a lecture on caste and law. And then in the first line, the opening line of the paper was, caste is law. So in India, caste is that becomes the law. It is not only the law, it is the way of the life, it is philosophy, it is how the lives of the peoples are regulated. So from antiquity, Indian society can be seen embroiled in historical violence of ritual outcasting. So the term Dalit, it was first used by Ambedkar and which was made popular during the second wave of Marathi Dalit movement in 1972 by Black Panthers. And Dalits in their struggle, they were united not by a common language or a set of cultural practices, but through a form of oppression. This is what J. Soske writes. Does Dalit include all scheduled castes, the tribes, neo-Buddhists, laborers, landless, destitutes, peasants, women, and all those who have been exploited politically or economically in the name of religion? They are Dalit. This is what Lakshmi Hallstrom writes in the introduction to Bhama's Sangati. So, because Ranjana has already talked about Om Prakash Valmiki's Jutan, and which is like in which he has described his experience, I'm skipping what I have to say on Jutan. I move on to the next text, K. Gunasekaran's The Scar. In this the Scar, he explores and he comes to understand that whatever provisions are made, whatever we have got through constitution and through political setup, all these are not enough. And this is where we find that his autobiography, which it attempts to give a voice to the marginalized section of the society. And Gunasekaran, he shows the struggle of the individual to attain a respectable status and appeal to have a human life. And he writes that even now it hurts to think of those times when we had to stand up in front of the others in class, shrinking and cringing. They would reinforce caste identities by labeling us pallars, pariahs, and chakaliyars in front of our friends who never knew what caste was. So a caste person is never ashamed of the caste. In fact, with the caste people, they take with the sense of pride when they assert their identity. Whereas when we talk about the Dalits, if they will not hesitate to utter their caste, at least that sense of pride is somewhere or the other, is either it is in doubt or it is missing. So the caste people, they always have that sense of belonging in them for their caste, but a Dalit, though tagged with a label, never wants to belong to it. So with a fractured sense of identity, being and the future that he has, a Dalit is more in a struggle with himself than with the world around. In the introduction to the Scar, Rajkumar mentions about Ambedkar's observation, and he writes that a Dalit in a village does not socialize with others, nor is he accepted by others. Despite this fact, he considers the village to be his. This is the irony of a Dalit's life, that though he is part of a village, but does not belong to it. Gunasekaran mentioned that whichever village we enter, the first question would be asked will be that who are you? And the who are you is not the name. The who are you is also the surname, the caste, and it is specifically which is asked. And the moment they knew we were pariahs, they would not offer us a drink in a vessel, but would pour it into the folded palm leaf. So no less questionable is the condition of Dalit woman. As Sharmila Reach, she marks in the introduction to the writing to her book, the Writing Caste, Writing Gender, that the cause of Dalit womanhood tends to fade somewhere in the debates between caste and feminism. Consequently, less attention has been paid to the discourse of Dalit woman. She says that this lack of engagement cannot be dismissed easily, either by Savarna feminist justification of being frozen in guilt, or by resigned Dalit feminist position that sees a fit of caste identities and ideological positions. Brahman and upper caste women will be Brahmanical. The former assume that caste is solely the concern of Dalit women and bypass the need for all women to be to critically integrate complex histories of caste and gender oppression. The latter resigns itself to assuming impossibility of transcending caste identities, thereby amounting to a slippage between Brahman and Brahmanical and non-Brahman and non-Brahmanical. Similarly, Kalpana Bardhan writes in of women, outcasts, peasants, and rebels. The power relations and modes of oppression in society must be seen at multiple levels in their many faceted and interconnected patterns. Both oppression and resistance of the oppressed are structured by gender, class, caste, ethnicity, usually in combination. Thus, the case of Dalit woman signifies double or maybe triple jeopardy when clubbed with class. So Bhama's Sangati, it acquires a sort of importance in unearthing the basic quotidian lived realities of the Dalit woman, and she calls her narrative as episode events instead of directly calling it as making it a grand narrative, a kind of thing. There is like the polyphony of voices of the Dalit woman which is being heard. She declares in the preface that Sangati is a look at a part of the lives of those Dalit women who dare to make fun of the class and power that oppress them, and through this they found the courage to revolt. The social reality of being a Dalit and being a woman creates a vulnerable situation in rural setting. This concern becomes clear when Pati warns the narrator against the caste men. Women should never come on their own in these parts. If the upper caste fellows clap eyes on you, you are finished. They'll drag you off and rape you, that's for sure. So Pati also gives a second thought that why their men do not allow them to go to cinema. They cannot go as freely as the upper caste women, because what if some wicked fellow or the other is waiting to rape us? So that insight is very clearly projected. There's no refuge for a Dalit woman in agony who is abused and assaulted. The narrative shows many incidents when the Dalit women are molested, assaulted physically and verbally, tortured and silenced. The case of Dalit women repressed, constrained and strangulated in the chains of tradition is well projected by Hira Bansode in her poem Slave, where she writes where a woman in her youth is dried up by tradition. She is confined all her life like a stunted tree. She remains in the shadow of someone else's light. In that country, a woman is still a slave. To be born woman is unjust. Bama reveals even though they are male, the Dalit males, they are, because they are Dalit, they have to behave like dogs in front of the landlords. There is no way to show their strength in these circumstances. So they show it at home on their wives and children. She also projects that the effect of education on Dalit women, and education is when it comes to education, boys are educated, but when Dalit girls are educated, it is seen as a loss because the girl will go to someone else, and therefore there is nothing that is left with the family. So the irony, however, is that even if one knows about his or her rights after education, even if one knows that one is created equal, even if one is educated, the trace, as Derrida refers to it, still remains. So caste is left like a residue in a person's life and generations to come. In Derridian concept of trace, meaning is an always already absent present. Thus, if a human being is not an upper caste, he or she ought to be a Dalit. So Bama writes that when I finished my studies and began to look for jobs, I realized that even within education, one has to face many difficulties. When trying to earn a livelihood, being a Dalit creates a problem. On the top of that, being a Dalit woman makes it more difficult. The biggest problem of all I realized is trying to live alone as an unmarried Dalit woman. So Dalit womanhood can be seen as a colony of caste and patriarchy. And as Ashish Nandi puts it, that colonialism colonizes minds in addition to bodies, and it releases forces within the colonized society to alter their cultural priorities once for all. Gopal Guru writes in this regard that caste categories give constitutive content to Brahmanical hegemony, which in turn construct both women and non-Brahmins in such a way that the latter becomes willing partner in their subordination within the cultural framework of Brahmanical hegemony. And a similar kind of a similar kind of incident is mentioned by K. Gunasekaran when he talks about MLAs, doctors, engineers, Dalit who have established their names and they have got a reputation. But when they come back to their village, they are still reduced only to that caste identity. They are not given that social repute. So even when the caste people, they are coming to visit them in the cities, those same caste people, they will look down upon them with that kind of mindset. So this is what Lord
Raj, you may look to summarize, please.
Yes, sir. I'm just coming to it. So this is what Laura Burek, she points out, that the justice system and the media conspire to diminish the clear role of sexualized violence in maintaining caste hierarchies. So the institution, they silence women's voices, reifying the social script of rape in which women remains pawns in social struggle between men. As a consequence, women's subjectivities are erased from narrative of sexual violence. And when we look at the Dalit writings and including the Dalit women writings, so it is like they are not pleasant stories that will delight the readers with their language, theme, or content. As Sharan Kumar Lamble elucidates in Towards the Aesthetic of Dalit Literature is distinct, and so is the language of this reality. It is uncouth, impolite language of the Dalit. It is a spoken language of the Dalit. This language does not recognize cultivated gesture and grammar. Dalit experience runs parallel to caste experience in the same society. Dalit writings might appear harsh and venomous, but their harshness is not directed against the people. As Professor Mehra has mentioned it before, that is directed against the discrimination against the caste. And similarly, when we talk about the violence and the discrimination against women, it is not directed against men. It is directed against the conventions of patriarchy and the patriarchy that creates patriarch out of men and women all together. So Dalit writings become literature of of cries, suffering, pain, struggle, survival, resistance, and protest. Thank you.
All right. So, yes, your paper on living a thousand tragedies, violence, memory, and trauma, you have brought out significant insights, and I mean, I see lots of comments of appreciation about this, and I think your references, the books that you have referred to, and you know the citations from a whole broad context, it is impressive. We will discuss this even more during the question and answer session. Yes, and now I think it's time that we listen to Vandana Lal. Vandana Lal is from Department of English, Daulat Ram College, University of Delhi, and she has chosen to speak on caste and cultural others, understanding the ethics of translation and location of the translator. This is very important, and we are very keen to listen to you, Vandana Lal. Please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, respected chair, my fellow presenters, and the audience. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, very much. Go ahead.
So my paper revolves around the idea of a non-Dalit translator of a Dalit text. There are 3 subsections in my paper, and I begin with the introduction first. So the title of my paper is Caste and Cultural Others, Understanding the Ethics of Translation and the Location of the Translator. What manifests the difference between a Dalit subject and its social others is a question long discussed in academia now. Can non-Dalits write Dalit literature? Can non-Dalit do Dalit theory? Should non-Dalits translate Dalit texts? And so on. This paper tries to analyze the role of ethics in contemporary approaches to translation studies, because the question of who translates what and how becomes even more important in the context of pervading social caste-based hierarchies and linguistic inequality. The constitution of Dalit selfhood in literary pieces written in the vernaculars, when undergoes the interpretation stage, that is, the reception and translation thereof, the authorial justice brought about by authentic life experiences based on lived vernacular reality becomes prone to politicization. For this reason, when sensational marketing and commercial reasons dictate which author, text, and language gets chosen for translation and publication, the question of the translator's identity, geographical location, and hierarchical categories like white, brown, black, Dalit, non-Indian become more visible to the reading public. The relationship between caste and experience, as discussed in The Cracked Mirror, calls for a rethinking of Dalit subjectivity, caste identity, and the question of universality pertaining to the varied experiences of inequality, exclusion, and other forms of stratification like race and class. Linking Dalit subjectivity, caste identity, and lived experience, Guru notes that there is an essential, unbreakable relationship between the subject who experiences and the context and content of experience. Unquote. Post-colonial theory perceives the act of translation not as a cordial dialogue between equals, but as a practice of cultural, social, and political appropriation, one that deconstructs and subverts canons, resists ideological discourses, and exposes the inevitability of heterogeneous interpolations. Now I begin with the first section of the paper, which is titled as Dalit and Non-Dalit Translators and Retention of the Truth Value. The insider-outsider or the Dalit non-Dalit debate concerning Dalit writings in India is already much discussed upon. While non-Dalits, owing to their privilege, are present within all prime locations in and outside academia, Dalit translators are even today not readily available. Linda Alcoff, in The Problem of Speaking for Others, addresses a pertinent question concerning who can and who should speak for whom, one that lies at the heart of identitarian politics of all kinds. She offers an attentive insight into the ethics of representation while describing how context is so important not only in deciphering meaning but also truth, what is said, by whom, and how. Alcoff emphasizes that the location of the speaker, the context of what is being said, where, and whether what is being said is true or not, determines the epistemic validity of what is said. It is argued that speaking is not simply a matter of individual choice. Rather, the act of speaking is one that carries with it a sense of responsibility and accountability. It is said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. To address injustice, Alcoff argues, even if it is about speaking for others, and however problematic it be, is an act of responsibility. For the privileged to retreat from speaking for others only with the desire to rule out criticism, Alcoff reiterates, undercuts political efficacy of the entire discourse of justice. If the others in question are not in a position to speak for themselves, the impetus to speak becomes even more crucial. In writing culture, the poetics of politics of ethnography, Clifford and Marcus argue how even ethnographies are social constructions and lack any fixed truth value. The book discusses ethnographies as research involving inventions of cultures. It argues how ethnic communities are not fixed in space and time. Since ethnography involves qualitative research based on reliable participant observation and or experience, it is not an unambiguous representation of truth. Clifford and Marcus develop on the insider outsider dilemma of ethnography and discuss how challenging it can get for an insider to objectively approach a language, culture, ritual or a tradition. An insider ethnographer, as against an outsider, struggles with the idea of self effacement to reconcile between the objective and subjective accounts. However, language is a site of meaning construction, and so is translation. Given the significance of English in the Dalit discourse, English translation inevitably holds the potential for enhanced visibility and dissemination of Dalit writings. Spivak discusses translation as a possible site of constructing and articulating otherness, Oriental, sexual, subaltern, and so on. In the politics of translation, Spivak points out how the subject position of a subaltern as a caste oppressed Dalit Bahujan, tribal, or a woman is even more vulnerable to foreshadowing and silencing. Any translation of such a subaltern writing becomes problematic with myriad possibilities of cultural appropriations and political manipulations. The act of translation, hence, emerges as a site of power politics between the center and the margin. It ceases to merely be linguistic, aesthetic, and neutral, rather becomes cultural and political. Discussing the case of a Dalit autobiography in translation, Christy Merrill also raises the question of double infidelity concerning firstly the generic category of Atmakatha, that is, to translate one's lived experiences into a language, and secondly, the activity of translation itself, that is, translating from one language to another. Merrill problematizes the assumption that insiders only are trustworthy translators of their own authentic experiences and are thus verifiable sources of information about their lives. Unquote. Discussing the case of Om Prakash Valmiki's autobiography Jhuthan's English translations, she rather suggests that this insider's experience is in part constructed by a series of outsider languages, not only the caste-based Hindi linguistic culture, but also Indian and American English that posits an autobiographer in both the singular and the plural, and an insider who can describe his life from the outside. Merrill here warns us against essentializing a community experience both at the linguistic and ethnographic level. Even while discussing an autobiography, for instance, references to the Dalits in the plural are non negotiable. The early usage of the term Dalit in the newly independent yet caste bound India to denote a pan India solidarity across regions, cultures, and languages was clearly not meant for a homogeneous group and certainly not singular. Also, Merrill questions if the nature of the truth in question is one with a heterogeneous history, then which fixed truth value do we expect the autobiographers and their translators to adhere to? Question mark. Now I begin with the second section of the paper, where I will be talking about the significance of the location of the translator. Literary translation, on one hand, is treated poorly in academia. Translators are not paid enough despite having to channelize unrelenting intellectual labor. However, some of the possible reasons why translators pursue literary translation, if not for money, can be academic, research oriented, political, professional, and related to passion or prestige. The idea of the original and the copy in the translingual practice of translation is still adjudged. reductive theoretical perceptions pertaining to loss in translation further diminish the image of the translator. The presumed host and guest relationship between the author and the translator, respectively, further marginalizes the figure of the translator. In other instances, name and status of the translator and the publication house become a gateway for wider publicity and marketing success of the translated text. Aesthetic and political implications hence govern a translator's visibility. Visibility has become an ethical question for women, minorities, and sexualities of all kinds. Therefore, it becomes all the more crucial to discuss ethics of representation. In an article titled Death of the Author, Christy A. Merrill discusses how much power does an author has on his or her text. How far is it niche marketed as the intellectual property of the author? How much craft does it need to translate? Mini Krishnan, in an article published in the Hindu titled Lost in Translation, laments some of the disturbing developments in the Indian publication industry. She questions why should the name of the translator be missing from the cover page. She inquires, does masking the true origins of a work make for better sales? Is a work less worthy because it is a translation? Is there no originality in a translated product? Question mark. She further stresses over the significance of translators in a post-globalized world and writes, and I quote, "Can anyone deny the historic power of translators? Their work has forced massive shifts in the literary canon, cross-fertilized writing, and propelled communities emerging from invisibility, besides influencing the vision that language groups have of societies other than their own." Multilingualism is a part of the structure of our life. Intercultural, interlingual encounters amidst confusing Indian multilinguality constitutes dynamic semantic structures, making loss in translation inevitable. G.N. Devi identifies such an interior experience of carrying multilingualism across as monolingualism as an instance of alienated translating consciousness. English translations of Indian vernaculars induct homogeneity in heterogeneous Dalit experiences. From a respective Dalit heteroglossic speech to its literal script, followed thereafter into English translation, the cultural domains within a source and a target language are always governed by structural asymmetricality. To translate a language system to another is to interpolate this asymmetry. The question of appropriation of the source text is more complicated to decipher in the case of dead authors, while with living or contemporary authors, the act of translation should necessarily be a collaborative process. To rule out conflict of interest during and after publication, moreover, nowadays author's consent is duly taken in the form of an approval statement, or a statement by the translator reads like contextual translations are done in discussion with the author, unquote. Hence, the value of collaboration in translation remains important. For instance, Devanura Mahadeva applauds Susan Daniel, the translator of his novel Kusuma Bale Das, and I quote him, "I think it will suffice to say that I saw in Susan those transforming emotive states, more or less those ups and downs that I myself went through while writing Kusuma Bale," unquote. Now I enter the third and the last section of my paper, which is titled as How to and How Not to Translate a Dalit Text. The nature of public sphere is never devoid of topography of high and low. It is never flat. As a result, some can get into it easily and some can't. Laura Bruick, in writing Resistance, discusses Dalit literature as a counter-public sphere, shaping a protest discourse to challenge the mainstream literary discourse. Sharing her thoughts and experiences about translating Ajay Navaria from Hindi into English, she discloses in an interview how difficult it gets for the translator when words and phrases in a source language begin to reverberate metaphorically. She reveals how she used to ask Navaria several questions to unravel the exact linguistic and cultural layers, and how the author, Ajay Navaria, the publisher, S. Anand, and the translator, Laura Bruick, had to come together to decide upon the right tone and pitch of the target for the target language readers. She also brings on record how the first draft of the translation required de-Americanization to retain the Indian touch. Translation hence is fundamental to cultural encounters. It facilitates global humanities and bridges disciplines. Moreover, if languages are not mutually intelligible, there can't be any one universal strategy for translating texts. This brings our attention to translation ethics. Traditional notions on translation ethics, like if something intrinsic to the source text is missing in its translation, it is unethical and wrong on part of the translator, are challenged as early as 1957 by George Monin, who noted that there are instances where certain words, grammar, style, semantic structures, and even the context are simply untranslatable. Hence, if in the act of translation loss is inevitable, it should be discussed as an act of sacrifice of knowing what to retain and what to not. Even Mona Baker describes the act of translation as a violent activity. Translation is inherently violent because it necessarily involves reconstituting the foreign text in accordance with values, beliefs, and representations that pre exist it in the target language. The translator exercises a choice conceiving the degree and direction of the violence at work in his or her practice. Unquote. For Peter Newmark, hence, the translator's representational commitment should remain with the truth, universal, pure, and clean language, morality as it evolves, style, logic, and political correctness. For Taury, translations are facts of the target cultures. Even for Andre Lefebvre, a genuine translator is a writer who wants to bring those two completely separate persons, his author and his reader, truly together, and who would like to bring the latter to an understanding and enjoyment of the former as correct and complete as possible without inviting him to leave the sphere of her mother tongue. Unquote. Now, in the last section, I'll just try and wind up in 2 more minutes. And in the last section, I talk about the significance of ethics and contemporary approaches to translation studies, which include the following notions. Number one, nowadays there's no concern in contemporary approaches to translation studies, there's no concern for the ethics of linguistic equivalence. Number two, ethics in translation is increasingly a contextual concern specific to socio-cultural locales. Number three, focus is more on people than texts or subjectivities inscribed in texts. The possible reason for this shift is the growing interest in anthropology, ethnography, and community interpreting. And last, the translator's engagement with the social and cultural practices is more pressed upon. Imagining, inventing, and reconstructing alternative Dalit cultural identities calls for an understanding of how cultures are constructed and, in the case of Dalit writings, resurrected. The processes of construction of identity among lower caste communities navigates through historical relations of power. To reinstate one's culture through writings and negotiate identitarian claims requires historical consciousness of who you are and where you belong. Writing, reading, and translation of a text, hence, entails particular subject positions. A conscious awareness of subject positioning helps dichotomize histories, re empower languages, and create newer texts and critical discourses for further intense dialogical imaginations and counter narratives. Given the
Madhana,
descriptive
please,
contemporary approach,
you need to
I'll
conclude,
just take
please.
30 seconds more.
All right.
30
Yeah.
seconds more and
All
I'm
right.
done.
All right.
Given the give, Given the descriptive contemporary approach to translation studies, along with its due adherence to translation ethics, I argue translations of Dalit writings by cultural others, be it non Dalits or non Indians, need not be abhorred, rather, should be welcomed. Even if there are mistranslations and misappropriations, it will still create a discursive space and offer a corrective to the idea of India in the Western eye as a casteless country. Thank you.
All right. Vanna, you have in your paper like understanding the ethics of translation and location of the translator raised very important questions. And though you have talked about the translation process, but almost seamlessly the way you have covered the whole range of social issues around that, it is very impressive. And I think your paper has covered a very important aspect that we are engaging with in sense of translator's role and responsibility, and the references that you have made is the list, the entire list is very impressive. We will discuss it even more in the discussion session. And now I think we have to give time to V. Shiva and Dr. S. Balasundari. They are presenting, I don't know who will present, resistance in Sharan Kumar Limbale's Akarmashi. So that belongs to you. Please take
Mm,
over.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the introduction. Respected chair, professors, scholars, and dear friends, good afternoon. My title of the presentation is Resistance in Sharan Kumar Limbale's Akarmashi. My paper is based on interpretation uh, by Richard Lennox's concept called antipodal culture in his book Speaking Tree. Later, this concept used by Tamil Dalit intellectual Raj Gaudaman in his article Dalit Culture. So, based on these the texts, I have written this paper. Mm. So, I would like to highlight how Limbale's Akramashi questions the caste discrimination, patriarchal system, morality, and culture, and finally the practice of Devasa system. So I start with the caste discrimination. So Limbali's Akramashi vehemently questions the nature of untouchability and purity through the character of Parasaya is Limbali's friend. Let me quote directly from the text. Uh, Parasaya was saying to her, "So you call us Magas, don't you? Your water gets impure if we touch it. If that is so, then why doesn't this river turn impure? If a human being becomes impure by our mere touch, then why don't your color change to green or yellow? As it happens, when someone is sick or poisoned, why don't the food your bundle rot? If you consider us Magas, then answer my questions. We won't let you go." So these above lines tells us that is not only protest or resist towards the caste system, rather than he gives a kind of a political awareness to the people that caste is not caste is not a natural, rather than it is fabricated by Hindu social order, which never sees people are equal. Rather than it teaches the disparities among people. I would like to quote one more instance in Limbole Sakramashi. He says, "I used clean clothes, bathed every day, and washed myself clean with soap, and brushed my teeth with toothpaste. There was nothing unclean about me. Then in what sense was I untouchable? A eye caste who is dirty was still considered touchable." So this is how he says, we can say in the words of Dr. Professor Rajkumar Morning, he says, caste is anti-national, it's anti-social. That's what Limbal is expressed in his book Akramashi. Then I would like to highlight, he counters the Hindu culture in order to um, he is doing his marriage. When his marriage takes place, he wanted to replace the Hindu religious traditional religious codes. He replaced Hindu traditional codes to the Buddhist rituals. He wants to paint instead of Om, he wants to paint Jai Bhim and Namo Buddha. That's how he counter the social hegemony. It simply says that he wants to he wants he needs change. He wants to go out of this social order. And I would like to add one more point. What he gives, he wants to he also speaks nationalism. What kind of nationalism? When he was going to college, where there was a thread for reservation. At the time, he says he wants Dalitistan, because Dalits are neglected or oppressed by socially, politically, and economically. and even Ambedkar has sanctioned the reservation, so that the Dalit children, they come out from the caste oppression. So when the thread for reservation, that time he want Dalitistan, because he wanted free. He was not ready to involve in confined system. And thirdly, he questions the Devdasi system. Dev system is a practice which is found among mostly in southern parts of India, particularly Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and Mumbai, where we can find most of the Devdasis or belong to Dalits. So he questions why other upper caste women or Brahmins women, they not involved in Devdasi system. He vehemently questions that also, because Dalit women brutally raped, even they used Dalit women's bodies as objects. Nowadays it has another form. You can found that every news channels reported that most of the Dalit women brutally raped. Uh, that's also a question. And now I would like to conclude my paper saying that Limbale's Akramashi is a Limbale's resistance is a site for social change in terms of questioning, subverting, and protesting the Hindu social order. He wants to create a new social order where Dalits wants to be free. They wants to be taste the liberty. That's what Limbale wants to instance throughout his autobiography and his studies also. Thank you for the opportunity given by the college and chair. Thank you, sir. Sir, can you hear me? Hello, sir.
Hello.
No, sir.
Yes.
I have done it, sir. I have completed.
All right. Thank you. Now we'll go to the next paper, and that is understanding intersecting marginalities in Manoranjan Vyapari's autobiography, interrogating my Chandal life. Saurav Kumar, PhD scholar, Department of English. Please go ahead, Saurav. What you have to say?
Thank you, Pramod, for introducing me. I hope I am audible and visible to everyone and my voice is clear. So give me a yes if my voice is clear. All right. So thank you once again to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. The title of my paper is Understanding Intersecting Marginalities in Manoranjan Vyapari's Autobiography, Interrogating My Chandal Life. Manoranjan Vyapari, often regarded as the Maxim Gorky of Bengal, best characterizes Vyapari's literary style, notably this autobiography. Like Gorky's autobiographical trilogy, his autobiography investigates distinct forms of marginality via the narration of his family history, childhood, early adulthood, and diverse life experiences, both public and private, that frequently intertwine depending on the circumstances. Vyapari examine the multiple intersecting impact of caste, class, refugee, and manifestation of other marginalizing factors that lead to several dimensions of inequality, which will be discussed in this study. This paper, through a detailed textual analysis, will explore and comprehend both the experiential and the structural dimensions of marginality, as well as the paradoxes associated with marginality as an individual or as a group. The second aspect that this paper attempts to address is the writer's approach to the multiple marginalities and how he perceives and combat those marginalities through his text. The third point of textual analysis would be to understand how marginalization manifests itself in society in certain recognizable and sometimes subtle ways, such as personal circumstances, child labor, migrant labor, and refugees. To begin with, in the preface of this autobiography, Bhopari begins the narration of his life journey with a striking opening statement. He says, and I quote, "Here I am. I know I am not entirely unfamiliar to you. You have seen me 100 times in 100 ways. Yet, if you insist that you do not recognize me, let me explain myself in a little greater detail, so you will not feel that way anymore. When the darkness of unfamiliarity lifts, you will feel, why, yes, I do know this person." Unquote. This statement addresses two interconnected issues. First, Bhopari's identity as a person belonging to the most oppressed section of Indian society according to the Varna system, and second, his identity as a Dalit writer, which was equally marginalized in the progressive Bengali literary domain till the time this autobiography gained global recognition in 2018. To address the second issue first, it is not surprising that in 2007, after being asked to address this issue many times, Meenakshi Mukherjee requested Bhopari to write an essay on the existence and recognition of Dalit writers and Dalit literature in Bengal. And this famous essay was titled, "Is There Dalit Writing in Bangla?" As for his recognition as a human being, has permanently been abrogated by this caste-ridden society. Hence, it becomes inevitable for the writer to tell his story to lift the darkness of unfamiliarity assertively. The first act of defiance and lifting the veil of darkness is demonstrated by the title of this autobiography, which emphasizes his intention to interrogate and highlight the politics of marginalization based on his belonging to a historically oppressed lower caste community, Nama Shudras, who are vilified as Chandals by the upper caste communities. In the very first chapter, the author provides us with a historical denunciation of the contemptuous Chandal identity when he narrates how his father and members of his community considered themselves as Nama Shudras of Kashyap Gotra. He also narrates the folklore that allowed the Nama Shudra community to claim that they are also highborn and were pushed out of the upper caste fold and condemned eternally as inferiors. Furthermore, after providing a genealogical history of his family and community, the author substantiates his criticism of the Varna system by quoting Tagore. This form of literary writing that demolishes historical and sociological discourse by providing an alternative narrative has been one of the unique characteristics of Dalit autobiographies in general and particularly Bhopari's. In addition, Bhopari's family, community, and thousands of others, including upper caste Hindu groups, were uprooted from East Pakistan, severing all ties with ancestral land, and were forced to flee to an unknown, and I quote, unknown geographical entity called India, as the refugees perceived it at that time. The post-partition state of affairs caused another existential crisis for Dalit refugees. And this question was raised in the previous session, and Rajkumar sir addressed it very beautifully, quoting Manoranjan Bhopari. For Dalit refugees who were driven to the limits of their refugee identity and doomed to live the inhuman circumstances of the refugee camps. starvation, typhoid, TB, and jaundice were the major causes of death. Even in these circumstances, his father wanted to educate him, but the local camp school closed even before Vyapari could step into it, as the government thought it was unproductive to feed and educate the lower caste refugees. However, as the author points out, the upper caste refugee communities were soon moved to the newly built or occupied colonies by the government, and the Dalit communities were offered to shift to the Dandakaranya rehabilitation project. On refusal to be deported to an uninhabitable land, the government not only discontinued rationing completely but also erased all the records of the Dalit refugee camps. And the author states this, and I quote, "These people's names had been scratched off, and so they now belong to no nation. The power of the pen, thrusting into non existence thousands of living human beings with one stroke of the pen." This was another turning point in writer's journey, and now he enters into a new phase of his life after running away from home and becoming a child laborer. And for the very first time in his life, as he writes, and I quote, "So now I came to learn of yet another division of humanity." Unquote. It is during these turbulent years of his youth and taking up various professions and getting cheated, sexually abused, raped, and humiliated by his employers that he came to this realization, as he sardonically writes, and I quote, "The master class has no mercy for the working class." All this while we witness that young boy trying everything in his knowledge to avoid the contemptuous treatment by the world around him. But no matter how hard he tries to survive and live a dignified life, it further leads him to a newer realization with every bitter experience. In one instance, the boy who now has a new name, Gibbon, that means Gibbon had to snatch food from dogs to fill his stomach, and at this moment he felt ashamed of his subhuman existence and gave up all his expectations from the world. Years later, when Gibbon somehow found his family back, he narrated his ordeal to them, but this was a different time period, and much has changed politically with the emergence of Naxalbari movement. At this moment in his life, Gibbon embarked on a new journey to build a classless, casteless society without any form of exploitation. And we witness a new Gibbon carving out a new identity for himself, different from his previous self. Now he had a new identity as a political worker, a principled political worker, and knew that the system it's like recognizing your adversary, and knew that the system that had given birth to this unequal society was his enemy. However, as the movement was crushed,
Saurav, you may conclude, please. Huh?
yes, this is my last paragraph,
Okay.
just 30 seconds. However, as the movement was crushed, his dreams were also shattered, but his time in jail introduced him to the world of letters for the first time in his life. Ironically, he got his first set of eyes, that is, education, as his father used to say, behind the walls of a prison and not a school. Moreover, after his acquittal, he was again back on streets as a rickshaw puller to quench the hunger which was never for a moment left him, but it was not just hunger at all. It was more about Jijibisha, that is, the will to live. His life has been about this will to overcome all odds. However, he could only comprehend this in words when Mahashweta Devi handed him the pen to keep the struggle alive. And I conclude. Thank you.
Okay, very solid presentation. You have made a point, and Gorky of Bengal, you have identified a very important text Yes, so I think that when we are talking about on the theme of this conference, resistance and revolution, politics of marginality, I think that we have traveled our way, in some significant sense, and we have covered this aspect of caste and marginality. Very important interventions have been made. When we look at the number of texts that we have covered, I think it's a big number. And right from, say, Om Prakash Valmiki's text to Vasudev Sunani's text, and when we look at Shravan Kumar Limbale's text, so we have covered the whole territory. Theoretical framework. What our presenters did, they have helped us to underline this fact that when we kind of step into 75th year of our independence, there are larger questions involved, and caste is that question which has to be understood, dealt with, negotiated, and solved as early as possible. And we have to when it stands out as a threat to our claim to modernity in a big way. And India's role in making this world a better place, I think we have to, if we do not deal with this question, it will be a big thing, big problem. And I think that as far as we have very short time, but we'll I could look at the this chat box, and there's a question for all of the presenters. But I think if Dr. Prabhakar, if you can address this, one of our participants asked, do you think that the emergence and popularity of Dalit studies in the current scenario, there is a corresponding effort to capitalize on the economic opportunity that this discourse presents?
Thank you, Pramod sir. I think definitely the Dalit discourse and Dalit studies have emerged in various institutions, but who is capitalizing and who is getting economic opportunity is a big question. As for instance, when Arundhati Roy writes Annihilation of Caste and giving a bigger introduction than the Annihilation of Caste, that becomes perhaps more popular than Ambedkar's writing Annihilation of Caste. And another instance is I think Navayana, by Anand. The print media again is greatly dominated by people like Anand, and they seem to be doing a great job by translating and by bringing definitely writings of Dalits into limelight and to the global market. But who is making economic opportunities? That is still a big question. Yes, that's what I can say from. Sir, you are muted.
All right. Yes, I think we can club it with the presentation which was made on the translation part, like in the politics of translation. So this idea of capitalizing is done, and at various levels. As far as translating the titles, for example, if you look at Moon's Basti becomes growing up as an untouchable, and then Akarmashi becomes outcast. So there are issues, and what our presenter has asked, I think yes, but again, that sense of capitalization should not be questioned in any sense. In that sense, because what is being done in the process is more centralization of the questions. I mean, I as an individual, I'll not question that in some way, because this discourse is still to be taken to its most logical culmination, and we still need to do much more. But I think that because we have short time, and so that we can connect to the other session also, we'll just try to conclude this. If there are some brief remarks, I mean, about 30 seconds if our presenters have to say something about this or anything that about anything else, then you are welcome. Otherwise, we'll conclude this.
Sir, I would just like to take 30 seconds to respond to what you were just now suggesting, if I have the permission, sir.
Yeah, please.
So I absolutely agree with Prabhakar sir's remark on Navyana Publication House, and to add to that, I would like to say that there are actually quite a few of these mainstream publication houses like the Orient Black Swan or the OUP, for instance, which are now like increasingly picking up this trend of publishing more Dalit writings. Like for instance, I remember some of these. Like for instance, Kusuma Bale and Akhil Nayak's first Oriyan novel Bheda, and Shivraj Singh Bechen's autobiography My Childhood on My Shoulders, which is recently published about 2 years back by the OUP. So all of these publications are now increasingly being taken up by these mainstream publication houses, and and because these known publication houses are taking up these publications, now they are also being they are becoming a part of the syllabi at the university level also. Similarly, Orient Black Swan has published quite a few titles by Dalit scholar Gail Omvait, and also by Rajkumar sir. Also, two of the texts of Rajkumar sir are published by the Orient Black Swan. And again, coming back to the idea of how Navyana publication house is picking up this idea to a commercial level, because if we look at the price at which, for instance, Bhimayana is sold out, or for instance a Gardener in the Wasteland is sold out, it's very high in comparison to how several other Dalit publication ventures like the Panther's Paw, Critical Quest, or the Shared Mirror, the prices at which they are publishing these Dalit writings are way too cheap, in comparison to the prices at which Navyana sells out their publications. Yes, sir.
Yes, you're right. I mean, I think that when we are discussing the whole politics, I was reading a paper in which there is a kind of reflection on the negotiation that takes place between a publisher and author, a Dalit author, and how the publisher would expect a whole lot of sensationalization, like only on the misery, lamentation, and then the pain part, and what Ranjana presented, like how mother reacts to that Tyagi's bad behavior. I think there is something that we need to do in that direction also. Yes, I mean this capitalization is a big problem academically and socially, and we will make put in our life, blood and soul, everything that we have to kind of come clean on this. I mean, and I think your papers will help us to kind of find a way forward for this. I'm very grateful to all of you. We'll connect to the other issues. I'll request the organizers to take over from here. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, everyone. Firstly, the team of students would like to take the screenshot, so I would request everyone to kindly switch on the videos for 10 seconds. Thank you so much, everyone. So with this, we come to an end of this very successful first technical session. And now, on behalf of the department, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the chair, Professor Dr. Pramod, and the presenters for enriching us with their valuable presentations. And special thanks to the audience for their participation and patience. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Professor Pramod.